We're continuing our coverage here, trying to analyze and decode the implications of the airstrike conducted by India. We now have an official confirmation. The Foreign Secretary briefing the media a short while ago, saying that this was a non-military preemptive action and was specifically targeted at the JeM camp. In fact, this was the largest JeM camp that was targeted. Back with us on the show, DS Huda, Lieutenant General, who was leading the surgical strikes when they were last conducted. Lieutenant General Huda, thanks very much for joining us, sir. When we spoke with you this morning, there was still no official confirmation that had come in from India. Of course, Pakistan had reacted officially. But now that the Foreign Secretary's briefing has been done, and I'm quoting from the statement, this non-military preemptive action was specifically targeted at the JeM camp. The selection of the target was also conditioned by our desire to avoid civilian casualties. The facility is located in a thick forest on a hilltop, far away from any civilian presence. As the strike has taken place only a short while ago, of course, further details are awaited in terms of casualty, etc. But your first reaction, sir, now that we have official details?
No, my first reaction is that, India has done completely the appropriate thing. There was a need to send a strong message across. There was a need to send a message, particularly to the Jaish, who had openly admitted to carrying out the attack. The Foreign Secretary's statement is very, very measured in what he said. So I think this was something that India needed to do, and I'm glad that they've done it.
Lieutenant General Huda, how significant will this strike be from a deterrence perspective, sir? Because what we heard from the Foreign Secretary was that intelligence agencies have credible information that Fedayeen attacks were being planned on Indian soil. Do you believe that this will be a significant deterrent?
I think it's a significant, statement of India's intent that we are not going to sit back if major terror strikes are going to happen in India. I think for the deterrent to be effective, it has to be a combination of diplomatic, economic, international pressure on Pakistan, combined, with our resolve that we will use military force if required. So I think a combination of all this, which India is apparently doing now, I think that is what is going to deter Pakistan from terror activities.
Sir, when we spoke this morning, you were talking about how you don't anticipate this escalating into something larger from here on. And since we've heard from the Foreign Secretary and the statement that India has put out, also the kind of response that's come in from the Pakistani side trying to downplay the strike, would you also now believe that a further escalation specific to this incident looks unlikely at this point in time? Also, the capability and the stomach for the Pakistan army to respond to this?
Yeah. So, I've always held the view that, this sort of thing escalating into an all-out war, the fears are a bit overstated. It's not as if Pakistan cannot, retaliate or do a limited sort of action. Or attempt to do that. But given the superiority of the Indian forces over Pakistan, whether it be Army, Navy or Air Force, I think it will be damaging and completely damaging to Pakistan if they try and escalate it beyond a particular level.
So you don't anticipate further escalation at this point. Lieutenant General Huda, also, if I may ask you about the use of air power, which has happened for the first time. In fact, it was last contemplated in 2002. The then Air Marshal Tipnis was someone who had suggested this. But the use of air power this time, sir, and that decision, you believe, was the most secure option for India to exercise?
Yes, given the fact that the Pakistanis would be prepared for something similar to what had happened last time, and that they would have probably vacated, terror launch pads in the aftermath of the Pulwama attack. So I think it was a completely appropriate action to utilize the Air Force, and obviously, it would apparently cause much more damage to the Jaish terror organization and the terror group. So I think the action was completely appropriate and must have been very well thought out.
Well, Lieutenant General Huda, always a pleasure, sir. Appreciate you joining us here. An important voice there saying that this was the most secure option for India to exercise, given the choices that we had, but also believes that this is unlikely to escalate into something bigger, but it was an action that was needed. My colleague Parikshit Luthra, who's been tracking the action since morning and was at the Foreign Secretary's briefing just a short while ago, also joins us. Parikshit.
Well, it's very significant that the government chose the Foreign Secretary Vijay Gokhale to do this briefing today. It seems that they would want to send a diplomatic message to Pakistan and also send out a message globally. There were a lot of foreign journalists who were also present for this briefing. By avoiding any senior military officer from doing this briefing, it seems that the government wanted to avoid any provocation. They wanted to keep the tempers low. They wanted to make this point very clear to Pakistan and the international community that this was a preemptive strike because there was intelligence, credible intelligence about the possibility of similar Pulwama-like attacks in different parts of the country. And they had information that there's a big JeM camp in Balakot. So this was a preemptive strike. It was an intelligence-driven, non-military operation. Very important words used by the Foreign Secretary to say that this was necessary for India's defense. We had information that there could be such terror strikes in different parts of the country, and therefore our intelligence forces prepared this plan. We carefully planned to make sure that no civilians are targeted. That's why the location was carefully chosen after a lot of planning as well. And this was a clearly intelligence-driven, non-military preemptive strike. So those were the words used by the Foreign Secretary. So a strong message being sent to Pakistan, but at the same time, the Foreign Secretary and the Indian government wanting to avoid any sort of provocation or military escalation in one sense. This is the sense that one gets after hearing the Foreign Secretary. He made only a brief statement that has now been put out by the Ministry of External Affairs. He took no questions, but our sources confirming that this strike was in Pakistan, in Balakot, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, which is the third largest province in Pakistan.
All right, the third largest province in Pakistan, the JeM camp, they're being attacked. And I think, as Parikshit was pointing out, and several of our other guests were also pointing out, that the response, the statement that's come in from the Ministry of External Affairs via the Foreign Secretary is a measured statement, and the likelihood of a further escalation at this point in time seems unlikely. You know, one cannot control the way that Pakistan will choose to retaliate, if it chooses to retaliate. But at this point in time, the sense is that this is unlikely to escalate into something larger. India has made its point. India has made its position very clear that it will not tolerate terror on Indian soil, and this should act as a deterrent. Well, we'll take a break, but there's a lot more coming up. Don't go anywhere. We're back in a moment.